All right, everybody, we're back again with Kid Lightbulbs. We're gonna talk about your album, um, "Step into the Ocean," if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what's the story behind the album?
Um, the story behind the album, it goes back a while. So before when you asked me about sort of my musical upbringing or when I how I kind of got to where I am musically, I mentioned that I had this period where I had left my band from high school and college years, and I was kind of dabbling with some things musically, but mostly like focused on my relationship, which is now my marriage, and my career in tech. And I was kind of just like writing a bunch of stuff off to the side. And slowly over a period from like 2011 to 2014, maybe, I put together a collection of songs. I think it were like eight in total, and it was going to be an album called Bedtime Rituals. And it was sort of a kind of romantic-y synth pop album, sort of about my now wife and my relationship starting to come together. Like a lot of it was written as we like moved in together for the first time, started like sharing a lot more of our life and things like that. And then my song Ritual, which I put out as a single back in March, I think, was sort of like the title track for that album. Um, a lot of that album basically forms the basis of this album. But I put out that I fit it kind of finished the general structure of that album. I actually brought in a friend, not we sort of lost touch, became estranged a bit to try and help with some of the like mixing and a little bit of production. And that actually was just like a very long, arduous process that I didn't really have time or mental bandwidth for, and it kind of just fell apart. I put the album on Bandcamp. I don't even think I had like a distribution, like a streaming distributor service at the time. So I just kind of put it online and no one listened to it. Like it just kind of sat there for a while. And then took it back down, kind of just put it aside for a while. A lot of those, actually all of those songs, except for one, made it on to Step into the Ocean. So the album is mostly intact from there, just with like so I rewrote a couple of lyrics on a few songs. Kind of I remixed everything, kind of brought it to like modern, kind of like in line with the Kid Lightbulbs kind of production sound that you hear now. Um, and kind of it just sat there until basically like very early of this year. I had written a few other songs slowly between 2014 and now. Curiosity, which is this next single I'm going to put out next week. Forget Everything, which is a different song that I wrote in like 2018, but it actually reuses quite a bit of lyrics and elements from that Bedtime Rituals record. So it was sort of like an homage back to that. Um, and after I had sort of started this Kid Lightbulbs project, I put out my first album. I was like, okay, this is actually like getting a little bit of interest on mostly threads, but also on like Instagram, and started posting some videos with like clips of my music on TikTok. And I was like, okay, so like this is like people are actually listening to this now. This is great. What do I do? Do I like go write a bunch of new stuff? Do I try and like go even more sort of like in this sort of like abrasive, sort of like industrial kind of new metal punk rock sound of my first album, Threw Myself into the Bay? Um, but I realized like, oh, I have this like all this old source material I could go back to and revisit. So I took the original session for Trendsetters, which was recorded in Reason, like an old version of Reason that I had to like pay to upgrade to get it to work with my newer laptop. That was a whole thing. But I took all the stems, basically all the dry stems, imported them into Logic, like started applying some of those like vocal and mixing presets that I had like come up with over the years to Trendsetters, made some tweaks to it, and then I was like, oh, like this sounds really good. Like this is almost like a development of the Throw Myself into the Bay sound, but a little bit more kind of sprawling and dense and complex. And then kind of slowly started revisiting all of those other demos that I mentioned, like the original Bedtime Rituals record, a couple of those songs that are sort of related to ideas from that I had written over the years, and kind of reconstructed it into a new album between basically January and a few weeks ago. And now it's 13 tracks. The title, so there's a one of the songs again from the original album from 2014 called The Worst Days of Our Lives. There's a lyric in there, now I'll step into the ocean, a lack of comfort in my way, et cetera, et cetera. And that's one of my wife's favorite songs that I've ever written. She was listening to my like remix of it that I have on this album. And I was like, I'm not really sure what to call this thing. I don't think Bedtime Rituals works anymore. That was like of a time. I don't even think it like it's kind of just a weird name for an album. It doesn't sit with me. And she was like, what about Step into the Ocean? And I was like, why? And she goes, because it's kind of like it's very related to your for like the name of Throw Myself into the Bay. Like she was like, they're both ways of getting into large bodies of water. And I thought that was really funny. And then I was thinking about it more, and it's actually like it sort of thematically worked really well because it was sort of a I mentioned with Trendsetter is almost like this more kind of sprawling, complex, kind of nuanced version of the Kid Lightbulb sound that I had started with. And I thought of Step into the Ocean as sort of a like a more kind of gradual, kind of nuanced version of whereas Throw Myself into the Bay, like you're just abrasive, like just unapologetically, just like throw yourself into something. Whereas Step is like it's a lot of what I'm doing as like a 35-year-old man, like everything around me, requires a lot of nuance, a lot of care, a lot of thinking before you act. So it just kind of like it was very somehow relevant to like how I think about life now, like the change in sound, the evolution of Throw Myself into the Bay. So it almost like became a spiritual sequel, even if it was written like 7 years mostly before the first album. So I'm doing a lot of like time is a flat circle in my creative life right now as a result of that.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it makes a lot of sense as well with the first
Good.
album. Yeah, I know. I love when those kind of things come together. That's reference here and there, and yeah, one could imagine it's like you say, like a point of maturity in a sense.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, that's really cool. So how long did the album take to record?
Um, the original album, I think I sort of did it slowly over the course of like probably 2 years. Some of the ideas also go like way back. Like I have an old demo of a much more loud and abrasive version of Trendsetters that goes back to like 2010. Curiosity uses a piano line that I wrote in school for like a piano composition class I was taking. So there's ideas from all over time in my life, but the original Bedtime Rituals kind of album, it's like a 2 year project from like 2012 to 2014, roughly, maybe. And then a couple of songs here and there, like I mentioned, throughout the years, and then the whole sort of like revisitation effort was really just like a very fast process from like January 2024 to again, like literally like 3 weeks ago, I sort of called it done. But I think a lot of it was like a lot of the songs on Step into the Ocean are really not changed very much from the original version. Like the original the like 7 tracks from that album. I think I re-recorded vocals on like 2 of the tracks, but otherwise like a lot of the original production's like there. So I was able to sort of like fast track a lot of this as a result of that.
Is it fair to say the album is experimental to some degree?
Yeah, yeah. I think in a couple ways. Like there's definitely a few examples of unconventional strong song structure and a lot of just um like sections of songs that sort of just like fold in on themselves rather than following like a traditional pop format. Um, on this album, even more so than the first album, I rely a lot on the studio as like an instrument. With a song like Trendsetters or a song like Ritual, where um, sort of the bridge of the song um, sort of evolves into basically like this extended second half where it's really just taking a couple very simple ideas and just like duplicating, expanding, manipulating them over, in the case of Trendsetters, like a 5 minute long period of time. Um, where I'm not really playing a lot of different things, but there's like 8 different iterations on the same guitar loop that all kind of bounce around the mix and things like that. So um, that was me literally experimenting with how do I make the most and like kind of make this really interesting kind of evolution of what is a very simple idea of like a couple different vocal melodies and guitar. So I think in that sense, it's like it's pretty experimental. Like I'm not kind of constraining myself to format or length.
Yeah, I listened to the album yesterday, and it was yeah, the album is great. It's
Thank
fantastic.
you.
It's I found it to be it's like the that's why I asked a little bit about arrangement, because it does take you for kind of a ride, you know, in terms of the energy changes. And the thing that I really liked about it is you don't really know where it's gonna go, you know, and that's a big
Yeah.
compliment, because
Thank you.
it's not predictable in any sense of the word. Um,
And it's funny to me that you say that because as I've been sitting with a lot of this material for like a decade, like I know exactly where it's going to go. Like the structure of it has basically not changed much since 2014, but I've like added things. I've like kind of changed things up a little bit in some ways. There are some ideas. Like there's a sort of a shorter track called Digression in the middle of the album. And that wasn't there until like April 2024. Like that there's a drum pattern and bass line that I had just had sitting in like my Reason like sessions folder from a while ago and I had nothing to do with it. But it happened to be the same BPM as Trendsetters. So I was like, why don't I see if I can relate these two ideas to each other? And that just came together in like a night. Even like the vocals are like intentionally very rough because I literally just threw it together, but then I kind of tacked it on to the end of Trendsetters and I was like, oh, this actually really works as like this interesting sort of coda. And the title Digression literally came from me being like, oh, this is me taking like some of the core lyric ideas from Trendsetters and like just going on a total tangent with them on a completely different topic, but with a lot of the same sort of like lyrical kind of form foundations. And it ends with just a smash cut, which was not there in the original. But I just thought it was like a really interesting way to sort of keep the energy up, and frankly, like test the listener's willingness to listen to what is basically like a 9 minute stretch of music from Trendsetters into Digression, and then just to have it just like cut off like instantly. It was so that I guess to go back to your question of is it experimental? Like, yeah, that was literally just like a test to see if I could pull something like that off, and I personally think it came out okay.
yeah, 100%. It's really cool. Is Trendsetters the first single off the album?
Yeah, that was actually the first song I really kind of meaningfully promoted as Kid Lightbulbs. Because I had that first album, but I kind of just put it on the internet and started just posting stuff. And then Trendsetters was the first proper like single I promoted as Kid Lightbulbs.
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably my favorite track. Um,
You.
I love the guitar. The I see what you mean now with the acoustic and the electric kind of mix now. Um, yeah, it's a lovely guitar. I want to know who's the lady on the song.
Mary Esther Carter. Mary's a friend of mine. We go back also like 10 years. She's a great singer-songwriter, dancer, like just multi-faceted performing artist. I think she's based in Burlington, Vermont now in the US, but we met through some music friends during a period where my wife and I were living in Queens, New York. basically like right over the border from Bushwick, Brooklyn, like where a bunch of like cool indie underground like music shows and things were happening. And we lived there for like a short period before moving back to the Boston area, which is basically where we live now. And in like meeting some of these music people, met Mary. We hit it off in a bunch of ways. I ended up sort of recording a couple demos with her for her stuff, and she offered when I was doing this kind of bedtime ritual sessions, we were just hanging out doing some recording, and I was like, do you want to just like try vamping over this like beat that I have for this thing called Trendsetters? And I think we literally just recorded the one take that is her just vamping for 4.5 minutes. And then I threw a little bit of auto tune on it at the time just to kind of see, because there were some parts where it's like she was kind of going off a little bit, and we were on a time crunch, and I was just like, let me see if I can like work with this one take. And I ended up just like leaving the take in there as is, just like with auto tune, because I thought it was like a really interesting production decision. Um, and then I tried weaving it in and out of my vocals and the guitars. And yeah, that I think that like basically just carries that song through this like very sprawling and what could otherwise be a very boring 5 minute end section.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. That's the experimental part, which I do enjoy. It's like you never know when it's gonna go. So, and I do want to ask a little bit about one song, "Head on My Heart."
Yes.
Um, you mentioned the vocals there. So, what's on that vocal, Shane? Because there's a really cool effect in the beginning.
On the vocals specifically, or
Yeah,
just
on the
yeah.
vocals.
Um, I I would need to go back to the session to look exactly at how it's put together, but those are vocals that are recorded directly into Reason. So that was when I was still using kind of Reason heavily as a DAW, but I'm pretty sure there's honestly just some like clip distortion and whatever Reason's version of pitch correct like auto tune is. I think it's called like Neptune. Um, I think that's basically it. It's otherwise a dry vocal. There's like almost no reverb on it, and very little like correction. It's really just those two things. Um, and that's like how a lot of my vocals are, just with or without auto tune.
Yeah, because I felt like it was like a psychedelic effect where it came and went sort of thing, and I was like, whoa, what's
Mm.
this? So yeah, that's really cool. So on the track Curiosity,
Mhm.
is it your kids on the sample?
No, I have one kid. This was a actually a are you familiar with the website like freesound.org? Um,
I've probably seen it. I rarely use
yeah.
any samples, any that kind of stuff in my music, but yeah, I know of it.
Yeah, so Freesound, it's a great website. It's basically a community website for anybody who records field recordings, and you can kind of just upload and license those up as you see fits. And there's a lot of stuff with kind of full Creative Commons, like free use licensing on them. So this was one that I was just kind of like looking for something vaguely of kids playing, just because that song is really about like being young and having kind of curiosity and kind of grand kind of ambitions to do something and kind of questioning your decisions. The whole kind of the vocal hook in the bridge of that is try not to think too much about it. So it's about like that battle of like being naive and ambitious and excited with like being realistic. And I thought there was something around like kids playing, just being very innocent and naive that just like fit for some reason, because it's otherwise a pretty sparse track. Um, so I just like landed on this and I tried fitting it in, and it just without much thought put into it, it just kind of just fit really nicely. Um, I I I almost it almost feels like a happy accident where some of the like the kids yelling at each other like fits in the take. I don't know if this is something you pick up on or found interesting, but at the end when it comes back in, there's a part where they're like playing some the kids are like playing some game, and one of them just goes, give me a bullet, give me a bullet. and like rhythmically it just like fit perfectly. And I don't know how I landed on it, but it just like works really well for me. So that's the story of that.
Yeah, I thought it had like an authentic quality to it because the even though it's in a song, it felt like it was a really raw kind of um like yeah, like you said, someone went out with the field recording to a real situation where like yeah, just very authentic for some reason. So I imagine maybe you went to pick up your kid at school and then you had some field recorder or something of that kind and yeah, decided to use it.
Yeah.
But yeah, uh,
Yeah. I feel like that's probably something I wanted to do. I don't think I even had a field recorder at the time that I found that, but I was like, if I had the tools and the time to go find something, I'd probably go find something. But let me just see if I can find something on the internet that kind of like fits the bill, and this worked for me.
yeah, we're spoiled with that thing already. And anyway, so
Yeah.
I mean, it's all bands in the past. They were always at the edge of cutting edge of technology. Um, so so we should as well, really. Um, so the vocal chains across the album, do you? I felt there were quite a lot of difference from track to track to some degree. You say you use
Yeah.
a template, but what aspects do you get experimental with in terms of the vocal chain?
I mean, a big one a big one for me is again like playing with distortion and like all different kinds of distortion. The beginning of Forget Everything is all like a very heavy bit crusher. So it gives you that sort of like digital sort of breaking down kind of effect. Digression is all just like a low frequency soft clip. So it sounds kind of like you're speaking almost into like a loudspeaker. Otherwise, a lot of the vocals on the album are pretty clean. Maybe Belly is another exception where I forget exactly how I got to the vocal sound there, but um, I usually start with that sort of preset for just like basic clean vocals and then kind of just go from there. Um, the other thing I'll mention about this album in particular is that again, a lot of even the vocals go back to like 2014, where I kind of had no idea what I was doing and I didn't have some of these presets. So again, I mentioned Belly, where I can't even really tell you how I landed on the vocal sound for that because the vocal sound goes back to 2014 and I don't know how I landed there.
Yeah, sorry, my cat was messing around.
No, you're good.
Yeah, she hasn't gotten any attention for a good 1.5 hours now. Um, yeah, I'm gonna let her do everything. She's climbing somewhere. Yeah, anyway. Um, so how many people did you collaborate with on this album?
So there's Mary, my friend Tess, who is not a musician, but she's actually a writer, but wrote the lyrics to Belly back in like 2011. And my wife is a really one, she's a really great sounding board for just like feedback on the music. And she's a great photographer and designer. So I use a lot of her sort of photography in the artwork. So she did like the album cover, a bunch of the single covers. But that's basically it. Otherwise, it's all me.
That's nice. Yeah, it's cool to have someone to get some feedback off of. Um, I don't really have that, but again, I tend to I tend to value my own opinion the most in that sense,
Yeah,
because I have to like it before anyone else will will like it as well,
yeah.
I think. So it's
I'm very much like that. I feel very much the same way. Like I almost don't care so much as to whether it has appeal beyond my own appeal. Um, for some reason, I do really care what my wife thinks. I make the music for myself, but I also want to make sure that I'm making it sort of for her as well. We have a pretty good overlap with our musical taste, which helps. Um, but yeah, otherwise I don't really make it for any particular audience. I'm just happy that I found a bit of an audience, I guess.
yeah. Yeah, that's a nice thing. It's a personal thing, So I mean, it's yeah, I only make music for myself. I'm only trying to impress myself, really.
Yeah.
Um So, but do you have any good advice for collaborations?
I've only done a couple collaborations, even like the ones with Mary and Tess that I mentioned, like those are from years ago, and we were kind of just like talking and wouldn't it be cool if kind of stuff. And I had to kind of go follow up with them and get their permission to go re-release these songs or release these songs with their consent, make sure I'm crediting them appropriately and things like that. But I've done a couple minor collaborations since then. Like I did a single with Bad Years, Illy Baby, who you probably know from Threads. Like we did a remix collaboration. I'm doing some like cover collaborations with some other Threads musicians. And honestly, the biggest thing is just like be be upfront and have documentation for things. So if you're fully expecting something and the other person doesn't deliver, at least having a paper trail so you could if you need to like go on the internet and publicly defend yourself or disparage. I don't, no one should disparage anybody else, but if you need to defend yourself or kind of bring some transparency to the situation, you do have that stuff available. Um, and that's really the best advice that I can give. I guess the other thing is, this isn't really advice on collaborating, but more advice on like how to deal with the collaboration. I'm honestly just like so flattered most of the time that people want to collaborate with me at all or remix my stuff or cover my stuff that like I almost don't really like I used to worry about like what if it doesn't come out good, and I'm kind of like it probably will come out good. I'm not really worried about it not coming out good.
Yeah. Yeah, so keep some receipts on collaborations, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of screenshotted Instagram threads, DM threads.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm still very much on the fence with collaborations. Um, I don't know, I'm slow. I'm slow making music. Um, and like I said, I don't like to be dependent on other people because one thing I know is if you want something done properly, you need to do it your goddamn self
Yeah. Oh
many
yeah,
times.
absolutely. I feel that pretty strongly, especially with like this music, anything that like has the Kid Lightbulbs name on it that is not distinctly a collaboration. Like I am wholly accountable for everything about it. I put a lot of thought into how I do the releases. Like I don't want to pay somebody to help me market. Like it's all I care very much about like not just the music and the sound, but also how it's sort of branded and perceived publicly. So I take that all on myself, obviously with my wife helping with a lot of the design aspects from time to time.
Yeah. No, I totally get you there. I mean, it's nice to have creative control over the whole thing, and I mean, I hate to say one is a control freak, but it's creative control, and that's very personal. That's something we keep very close
Yeah.
to hearts.
Yeah, it's an inherently personal kind of almost like egoistic thing to be an artist.
Yeah, I mean, you're putting yourself out there and your thoughts and soul and yeah, a bit of yourself really. It's like an open diary entry, really, in a sense.
Yeah.
Um, how do you feel about lyrics in general? Because my perception is that the listeners don't really care for lyrics anymore. They care about the vibe.
Um, that's a good question. I do think I think and agree pretty strongly that like vibe seems to matter a lot more than anything these days. I think it doesn't help that a lot of music sounds the same and a lot of lyrical ideas have been sort of done over and over and over and over again. Um, I think that lyrics can be powerful and important um, if they're kind of touching on things or adding a new voice to something that hasn't really been covered before. Like I'm I been trying to pay a lot more attention to like musicians in, like marginalized, underrepresented groups, just because that is just a new voice to listen to lyrically. With my lyrics, I do try to, and I think this is something that is actually very rare in popular music, try to just like lean more into like vulnerability and the stuff that like is unique to me rather than just trying to like make a love song, for example. So a lot of my stuff is like about me getting older, like being anxious about being a father, being anxious about like not knowing what the young kids are talking about. That's basically what Trendsetters is. And I wrote it again like 10 years ago, and it's like even more relevant to me now than it was 10 years ago. Um, I try to like provide, I try to like achieve some kind of unique not like spin, because I don't like spin things, but I want to make sure that if I'm gonna write something like a love song, it's got to be like from my perspective in a way that doesn't just sound like another love song. So even like Ritual is kind of a love song, but it's from the lens of um like being like pulled in a bunch of different directions and not wanting to be like wanting to resist that just because like the love is there, which is something I don't personally feel like a lot of people who write love songs like take that angle with it. Or like the production method that the production decisions that I made on that song. Um, yeah. So I think I agree with you that like lyrics don't matter to a lot of folks, but I think they can matter if you can provide sort of like something different and something unique, whether it is just like your take on a lyrical concept.
Yeah, I know. I feel like the love song has been done so many times, but uh, unfortunately, at least for my most recent song I'm working on, that's where I ended up because but there's a thought behind it because it's a certain style and era of a track that I thought
Yeah,
was appropriate uh, with one kind of angle. But yeah, I think Brandon, I've had so much fun talking to you.
me too,
Uh,
man. This is a lot of fun.
yeah, no, definitely. It will be a 3-part series.
This sounds good. I'll
Yeah,
take it.
yeah, it's probably the longest episode. Um, but yeah, that's very good. So now I can chunk it out a little bit, and hopefully it's easy for people to digest. Um, so yeah, I guess on that note, this has been the Threadheads podcast. I'm Sinui. That's Kid Lightbulbs. Check him out on Bandcamp, Spotify. You're on YouTube as well.
Yeah, I'm everywhere that you need to go if you want to listen to
Yeah.
music, or just my website, kidlightbulbs.com. I'm big into owning my own website. You can buy all my stuff directly from the website. You don't have to go to Bandcamp if you don't want to. But you can also find me there or anywhere
Yeah.
else.
I'll put a link on the screen.
Awesome.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. This has been the Threads podcast. I'm Sinui. That's Kid Lightbulbs. Have a good one.
I never know what to say, but I know how to take it, 'cause I can't keep up. I never know what to say, but I know how to take it, 'cause I can't keep up. You never know when to run when they shut you down. It's strength